Brian Murphy of multiple media now. What is your Twitter? It's like Brian Murphy
It's
Media?
just Murph Media.
Murph
I'm a
Media.
generalist, as they
Yeah.
say. I'm a free agent.
No, you're an empire.
I'm not quite. That's not what the checks are
A
indicating.
mogul, I think.
A mogul.
Okay, well, long time columnist. You want to go with that?
Emeritus.
I don't know what that word means. All right, well, let's bring in Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus. Sam, we've been talking about Adrian Peterson a lot. Is that okay with you? Can we talk about Adrian Peterson?
Yeah, that's fine. I will accept your programming. That's fine.
All right. Well, we're paying you nothing for this appearance, so I just figured I would check with you first. Well, what we've been discussing is Adrian Peterson's legacy as a running back. I mean, now we talk about the value of running backs not being the same, but he was super dominant as a runner during his prime, but not really a factor at all as a receiver. A very poor pass blocker. I mean, where do you kind of categorize him among the history of the great players at that position?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because it's all changed, right? You know, you go back far enough and running backs were important. They were the driving force behind offenses, and gradually over the years that's changed. And it's, you know, we recognize immediately that it's very difficult to compare quarterbacks across eras. But we assume you can with running backs. And honestly, the same thing is true. The game changes, so running backs change, and it's very difficult to compare, you know, even a Zeke Elliott with an Adrian Peterson, with a Barry Sanders, with, you know, a Jim Brown. They're all very, very different, not just players, but also in terms of the eras they were playing in and what they needed to be able to do. So Peterson was this dominant ball carrier. Incredible, his ability to make things happen on the ground and to turn nothing plays into something. But he came along and was dominant as the league was changing and pivoting towards a pass-heavy style of offense. And, you know, it's very difficult to square this idea that for as dominant as he was, for most of his career, his team did not think he was capable of being on the field in the most important situations when they needed him, you know, passing downs, hurry up offense, all that kind of thing. The Vikings would keep him off the field because they didn't think he was capable of doing those things, whether it was blocking, whether it was catching passes out of the backfield, all that kind of stuff.
Or hanging onto the ball.
That too. And that's really not the case for any of these other great backs. You know, the Lions didn't take Barry Sanders off the field when, you know, it was crucial downs. Now, he used to get criticism, Barry Sanders, for he didn't get the goal line carries sometimes. You know, there was a coaching staff that gave it to the fullback instead. But, you know, none of these guys I don't think you can point to and say, this guy had a sufficiently large flaw in his game that his team didn't trust him in some of the most important situations and they're ever going to face.
Sam, because we talked about how the game is trending and it's a pass happy game and it doesn't seem to ever going to regress back to a run first type operation, but he ran for 2,097 yards coming off ACL knee surgery in 2012. Will he be the last 2,000-yard rusher?
That's a good question. I don't know if he'll be the last. I think it's still possible to get incredible rushing production even in a pass-happy NFL. Because if anything, you know, running the ball is getting easier because all these spread systems and this heading towards spread concepts, it makes rushing easier because you're taking guys out of the box. And one of the biggest determining factors of what kind of rushing success you're going to have is simply how many people are lined up in the box. And you're not going to see these games where it's 8 men in the box every single play because the running back is so good. You have everybody lining up in 11 personnel with 3, 4, or 5 wide receivers. You just don't see people stacked in the box to stop the running back. You're going to get these, you know, Mike Leach style offensive rushing systems where a running back is able to have a huge amount of success because they're getting the ball and breaking off 8 yards to carry every single time.
So, Sam, where does this leave us with Dalvin Cook? Because I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and there's sort of part one and part two to the running back conversation. Part one is how much they're worth. Part two is, like, should you pay them at some point? And it's actually getting surprisingly close to the time where the Vikings would start having those conversations about a second contract with Dalvin Cook. Usually it's in the offseason before their final year where they extend players like Stephon Diggs or Danielle Hunter. And I have no doubts that they're going to extend Dalvin Cook too. I mean, what do we make of his value, being that he is more than just the runner's running back?
Yeah, he is. And the other thing is, so over large periods of time and over large numbers, running backs are more the product of their environment than they are the product of their own ability. But specific players can change that, and certainly over specific time periods. And there's no doubt right now that Dalvin Cook is driving a huge amount of his own production versus the blocking or the system around him. Every single time you watch a Vikings game, there are a ton of plays where Dalvin Cook should get 4 yards and gets 12. And that's happening, every single game, multiple times. And really the only blot on his copybook this year is fumbles. But he is playing incredibly right now. And that's the kind of thing that earns those players contracts, even if they aren't necessarily going to justify them going forward when that sort of regresses back to the mean.
Well, Sam, besides Adrian Peterson, Case Keenum gets to have a bit of a homecoming at U.S. Bank Stadium for the first time since the Minneapolis Miracle that he directed with Stephon Diggs against the Saints in that NFC divisional playoff game. And it's also been now 2 years since since Washington decided, we're not even going to franchise Kirk Cousins another time. We're just going to let him walk. How is there's still, the jury is out on what he's going to do during his tenure in Minnesota. But as far as Washington's decision to let Cousins go, how should we view that today?
I think they were probably right to do that. I think they had a reasonably good handle on what exactly Kirk Cousins was, which is a quarterback of a certain caliber that's capable of doing some things, but wasn't the guy they wanted to pay big time, long-term money to. Now, you can question the strategy of paying massive amounts of money to him whilst you decided that. They basically paid him a huge contract while they were dithering around deciding they didn't want to pay him a huge contract. So you can definitely criticize that way of approaching it. But I think, ultimately they've been proved right in terms of he's not a quarterback that's going to raise your roster and take you to the promised land if you're not capable of getting there independent of him. And from the Vikings side of things, they brought him in because they thought he was capable of elevating this team for certain games that either Sam Bradford or Teddy Bridgewater wasn't, or Case Keenum wasn't necessarily capable of doing. And that one's more complicated because I think they've been proven correct. He is capable of doing that on occasions. It's just that they need him to do it in a specific set of games, and he hasn't done that yet.
That's what's so interesting to me, Sam, about how we analyze Kirk Cousins, because of course I see the tweets of you were wrong about Cousins or after these last 3 games. And last year did happen and we all saw it. But the supporting cast right now is really good. Adam Thielen's not going to play on Thursday, but Thielen, Diggs, Cook, it's a better offensive line than it was last year, which isn't saying much, but it is better. And an improved system by far that seems to fit Cousins. But also, these things are not new for Kirk Cousins. The end of his 2015 season is miraculous. The 2016 season was really, really good for Cousins. And it's always been about, can he take this team where they want to go? And I think it's the rare situation, Sam, where we will actually judge this guy on big wins and losses. I mean, maybe it's not entirely fair, but that's how I think he's going to be judged here, not on any of his statistics or unfortunately not on PFF grades and things like that. It will be, does he get them to the playoffs and win there?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely will be. And I don't know that that's the wrong way of doing it. I think what we just need to do with Cousins, and when we talk about him, is stop living and dying with the various ebbs and flows of the roller coaster. That everybody was having a heart attack earlier in the season because Cousins was playing terribly, and now Cousins is playing like an MVP. And neither of those things are who he are who he is. He isn't a terrible quarterback, and he isn't an MVP caliber quarterback. He's somewhere in the middle. And what's actually amazing is he's consistently somewhere in the middle. And if you look at his PFF grades, every single year it ends up in the same band of 10, 11 grading points. And when he was playing terribly earlier in the season, we were saying, look, if he's going to end his season with a grade somewhere between 70 and 80, which is where he always is, he's going to have a couple of games that make him look like a superstar to drag this number back up. And that's exactly what he's done so far. So if you're going to consistently be an average quarterback over a 16-game period, the important thing for this team is simply where does he time the big performances for? Because they know he's going to be up and down, but if he times those big performances for a run that goes, week 17, division game, NFC championship game, Super Bowl, then he's Joe Flacco and he wins a championship and everybody's happy. If he doesn't time it for those important games, then he's just a volatile guy that, he's Jameis Winston, that ultimately a team decides they're better off without because he's not capable of doing it when they need him most.
About 10 days ago, we were sort of christening the NFC North as a division that may have 4 winning teams or at least send 3 to the playoffs. Well, the Lions got jobbed at Lambeau and then lost to the Vikings. Chicago basically got their souls taken from them by New Orleans at home the other day, and it seems to be emerging. It's Vikings-Packers here right now in charge, or at least in command. Do you see between Detroit and Chicago one of those two teams rebounding at all?
I mean, I think they could potentially rebound. I think it's very tough to ask, 3 or more teams from the same division to have a winning record simply because they have to play each other so many times. Mm-hmm. Chicago's problem is obvious to everybody. It's the quarterback, and it's the fact that the quarterback is it's basically the quarterback is taking the ship down with him. They're trying to adjust that offense to make life as simple as possible for Trubisky, and it's not having that effect. If anything, it's having the opposite effect, and it's making everything else worse along with him. And then the Lions, as you said, they did get screwed against the Packers. I think they're a reasonable team, but they may just be one that ends up coming out on the wrong side of too many kind of close appearances or too many games against good teams.
Okay, Sam, last thing for you. Thursday night, Washington, Minnesota. I think that the Vikings will be favored by a little bit here, but trap game, am I right? A little Trappy McTrapperson action here. Are those real? Is there any statistical analysis that would point us toward trap games being a real thing?
I actually haven't checked to see if there is anything to that idea of trap games.
Well, you're welcome. Get on it. Put Eric Eager on.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, no, if you could, ideally when we do these, if you could find the most obscure thing to put me on the spot about, that would be perfect. Yeah, I haven't checked into that. I think there are definitely games we can all point to anecdotally that felt like trap games and it came true, but that's the way the human mind works, right? We're hardwired to find patterns in noise, whether it's there or not. But ultimately, these are teams that the Vikings need to be putting away if they have any designs on winning football in January. The Redskins are not good right now. They have a couple of good players. They can do some big things here and there, but if you can't roll against Washington, you have no business making the playoffs.
Right. Well, how about Jeff George's big time throw percentage when he played for Washington in like 1995 or something? When was that?
Yeah, there's no 2000? Way Jeff George had any big time throws playing for Washington.
No. Oh man, what a great quarterback history. Like if you were ranking hilarious quarterback history, Washington has to be number 1, right? Or maybe Chicago?
Well, Jeff George came up the other day in a kind of random obscure trivia event, right? Luke Falk getting cut was the first quarterback since Jeff George to get cut the week after starting a game.
Jeff George. Oh man.